Have you ever felt that your silence was the very thing that made them panic? Not your words, not your tears, but your quiet, peaceful disappearance. That's what unsettled the one who once felt in control. Avoidants think they're strong because they don't need anyone. But what they need the most is your consistency, your pursuit, and your constant emotional availability. As long as you're still talking, they feel safe. As long as you're still reaching, they believe they're in control. But when you go quiet, truly quiet, the false confidence they built on emotional distance starts to collapse. This isn't just a story about heartbreak. This is a lesson in the power of silence. A power that doesn't come from avoidance, but from awakening. An energy not rooted in winning, but in conscious detachment. In today's video, you'll understand why your silence confuses and destabilizes the avoidant, how your lack of reaction becomes a consequence they never forget, and why reclaiming your energy is the most powerful thing you can do for yourself. If you're on a healing journey, or you want to understand the avoidant mindset through a secure lens, hit subscribe and watch till the end. Because silence isn't the end, it's the beginning of self-worth. Avoidants don't go silent because they're at peace. They go silent because it's how they control. Their withdrawal isn't apathy, it's a strategy. A defensive system built from childhood, from years where emotions were unsafe, burdensome, or met with rejection. In attachment theory, Bowlby, 1969, avoidantly attached individuals often grow up in environments where emotions were unwelcome. When a child's vulnerability is ignored or mocked, they learn this core belief: safety comes from needing no one. And from there, a deep part of them clings to the illusion that the more independent and detached they appear, the less they can be hurt. This isn't confidence, it's camouflaged self-protection. They don't try to control you because they hate you. They try to control you because they fear their own feelings. They use distance like a shield, calm, rational, emotionally unavailable, not because they're truly okay, but because they don't know how to stay present in emotional connection without feeling consumed. The closer you get, the more they pull away, not because you're wrong, but because their nervous system has been programmed to interpret closeness as danger. They're not running from you, they're running from emotional software they were never given. They don't hate love, they fear what love demands: loss of control, vulnerability, and exposure. Ironically, their distance doesn't come from strength, but from a deep fear of being seen, losing self, becoming dependent. And to avoid being exposed, they control through silence. They don't say much, because speaking means revealing emotion. They don't react, because reacting means admitting they feel something. And the less they respond, the more powerful they feel. But that power, it's not real. It only exists while you're still there. While you're explaining, worrying, trying. They don't do much, and yet they keep you around. That feels like power. But in truth, it's power borrowed from your effort. They're not confident. They're relying on you to regulate emotions they can't face alone. And when you go quiet, the entire system starts to crack. Why? Because when you stop reacting, there's nothing left to control. No emotions to manage, no mirror to reflect their value. And what they fear isn't losing you. It's losing the control over someone who once loved them unconditionally. As long as you were explaining, they felt significant. As long as you were hurting, they felt powerful. But when you find peace, when you stop playing, they begin to panic. Not because they love like you love, but because you were the anchor keeping them from facing their own emotional void. Avoidants pride themselves on independence, but they don't realize their sense of okay was built on the stability you provided. They weren't strong, they just never had to stand alone without your quiet emotional labor. So your silence becomes the most brutal mirror. It's not indifference, it's reflection. It shows them no one stays forever when they're taken for granted. Your silence is an intentional absence. And for someone who spent their life avoiding their inner world, that silence feels like being locked in a room with their deepest fear. Ironically, avoidants only begin to feel your absence when you're truly no longer there, not physically, but energetically. You were once the quiet emotional foundation holding up their inner world, even though they never admitted it. They were used to you, always coming back, always explaining, always reaching for them no matter how cold they became. They believed you were the one who would never leave. But when you chose silence, the kind that comes from awareness, not pain, the world around them suddenly became unnervingly quiet. No more messages checking in, no more waiting eyes, no more soft, steady presence that used to hold them even when they withdrew. And this absence, it didn't feel like the past, because this time they could sense something deeper. You had truly pulled away. Avoidants don't know how to sit with emptiness, not because they don't feel it, but because they've never had to face it alone. There was always someone to fill the void for them, usually you. You carried the weight of both hearts, holding the connection together while enduring the emotional injuries. But when you stopped, they were left with nothing to reflect back that false sense of, I'm fine. And from there, a new feeling begins to creep in, silent internal panic. What unsettles them isn't just the loss of you, it's the loss of the version of themselves they could only maintain when you were around. They don't know who they are without someone waiting, forgiving, or being endlessly patient with them. They start to feel a kind of instability, the same kind they once made you feel. And that's the turning point. Without you as emotional shelter, they're forced to confront the hollow space they've always tried to cover up with control. Now, they can't hide behind silence anymore, because this time, you're not on the other end of it. There's one truth avoidants rarely want to face. The calm they display on the surface, it was never rooted in true inner stability. It came from you. The emotional balance they were so proud of, the I don't need anyone identity, it was quietly upheld by the emotional consistency you kept giving. They thought they were strong because nothing seemed to shake them. But in reality, they never stood firm on their own. You were always the foundation beneath their silence. As long as you were there, caring, waiting, reaching, they could afford to be cold without feeling lonely. They could shut down emotionally without fearing disconnection, because deep down, they knew you would be the one to reconnect. They thought they didn't need you, but the truth is, they only felt confident as long as you were still there. They refused to see that their sense of control was propped up by your unwavering presence. Only with you playing the role of the patient, forgiving one, could they step into the role of the detached, self-sufficient one. Their so-called independence? It was actually emotional dependency in disguise. They depended on your kindness, your forgiveness, your endurance. They relied on the idea that you wouldn't leave. But when you walked away, not with anger, not with noise, just a silent, grounded withdrawal, that's when they realized the truth. Their confidence was a borrowed performance, and without your energy to sustain it, they felt hollow. Without you as the invisible emotional safety net, they lost their balance. Not because you took anything away, but because they never learned how to stand on their own. The raw truth is, their sense of security was never theirs. It was built on your consistency. And when that emotional supply is gone, they're left with nothing solid to hold on to. They begin to feel uncertain inside the very silence they once used to feel powerful. They begin to feel anxious inside the very identity they once claimed as strength. And that's when the facade crumbles. Not because you abandoned them, but because they were never truly as strong as they believed. When you were still there, they never had to face themselves. Every time they turned cold, you stayed soft. Every time they went silent, you spoke up. Every time they pulled away, you reached out. Your presence acted like a mirror, one that reflected back a version of themselves they were never ready to see. Someone who was loved unconditionally, yet unable to fully receive that love. You didn't just love them, you made them feel okay about the very parts they were trying to hide. And that's why they never had to change. Because you did all the seeing, all the loving, all the carrying. But when that mirror disappears, the truth begins to surface. There's no one left to blame, no one left to patch over the damage of their detachment. For the first time, they're faced with themselves not through your loving gaze, but through silence. And this silence? It's no longer a weapon they use to gain control. It becomes a sound that echoes from within. That's when everything starts to crack. All the fractures they hid beneath the mask of "I'm fine." All the discomfort they buried under performance. They begin to remember the times you cried, and they turned away. The moments you explained, and they dismissed. The days you were exhausted, but still found a way to love them a little more. The memories they once found inconvenient now haunt them in the quiet. With you gone, there's no one left to distract them. Every emotion they avoided, every wound they suppressed, every fear they silenced, it all rises, raw and uncovered. They once thought withdrawing meant freedom. Now, they feel isolation. They once believed needing no one was strength. Now, they recognize it was pain they never name. And the most painful part? No one did this to them. They did it to themselves unconsciously, automatically pushing away the one person who saw them clearly and still chose to love them anyway. As your silence stretches, they enter a territory of experience that used to only belong to you. They begin to feel the waiting that they once demanded from you. But this time, that waiting no longer comes with power. It comes with fear. They check their phone the way you used to. They scan for your name the way you once hoped for theirs. And in that tiny moment, staring at a dark, unlit screen, they finally understand what they thought was your calm was actually your attempt to survive uncertainty. They start to see the difference between love and control. Love is presence, control is withdrawal. And they see the truth. They never loved the way you loved. They once used silence to stay superior, but now your silence makes them feel small. This is the bitterness of reality. The very mechanism they used to stay in power has turned into a double-edged blade, wounding them instead. And this is the turning point. They can no longer tell themselves the story that they are the calm one, because they are anxious. They can no longer believe they hold the power, because they are losing control. They can no longer pretend they are the emotionally detached one, because emotion is flooding them like a rising tide. For the first time in a long time, they are feeling instead of analyzing. They are remembering instead of denying. And those memories burn, not because they lost control, but because they realize the value of the person they thought would never leave. This is real pain, not the pain of missing attention, but the pain of missing the presence of a heart they never learned to cherish. And in this pain, they finally understand you. They understand the sleepless nights. They understand the anxious days. They understand the feeling of waiting for one simple message, as if waiting for salvation. They understand it all, but too late. This is the part where the pain is no longer about losing a person, but something far heavier, losing the only place where they ever felt loved without having to perform strength. They begin to understand that you were not just a romantic partner, you were the rare safe place they once had in life. You were the only one who saw their darkness and didn't abandon them because of it. You accepted not the polished, controlled persona they showed to the world, but the inner, hurt, fragile part they tried to bury. And now they realize, it isn't you they lost, it's the only experience of real love they ever had. They used to believe love is replaceable. They never understood your presence was extraordinary. Now that you're gone, they discover the emptiness they feel isn't the absence of someone to text. It's the absence of a gaze that allowed them to exist without acting, without defending, without hiding. They had never met mature love before, and they treated it like something disposable. Now they understand the kind of love you gave cannot be replicated. It cannot be copied. It cannot be found in a new person in a matter of weeks or months. Real depth is not born from distance, it is born from vulnerability. And vulnerability was the one thing they never dared to offer. They are paying the price of that fear now. The regret is no longer about you, it's about themselves. They regret not allowing themselves to learn love. They regret using survival strategies to manage connection. They regret letting fear decide how they attach. And as they look back, they understand you didn't merely love them, you lifted them. You saw value in them that they did not have the courage to see in themselves. You saw their potential for love even when they denied it. And what devastates them most is this: those kinds of experiences do not come twice. You were the miracle they once had, and they let it die. Because they chose avoidance over evolution. The silence you chose wasn't meant to hurt anyone. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't a tactic to control emotions, like they once used against you. Your silence was a decision intentional, conscious, and rooted in self-respect. You didn't go quiet because you stopped loving. You went quiet because you had loved enough. Not because you gave up on the connection, but because you gave up the silent battle that was slowly draining your heart. This is not the silence of heartbreak. It is the silence of healing. You pulled back your energy, not to create distance, but to return to yourself. To stop chasing validation. To stop tolerating crossed boundaries. To stop exhausting yourself trying to prove your worth to someone unwilling to see it. That silence, it is the clearest, loudest declaration. I don't need to shout to be heard. I only need to choose myself. You no longer react from emotion. You respond from peace. And in that quiet, you hear your truest voice. I deserve a love that doesn't hurt to maintain. Silence becomes the beginning of freedom, not because you suppress feelings, but because you've learned not to let those feelings lead you back into old emotional cycles. You are no longer trying to make anyone realize your worth, because you've already seen it clearly, deeply, and without doubt. Real healing isn't when they come back. It's when you no longer need them to, just to feel whole. This is the kind of freedom born from emotional wisdom, a serenity that needs no applause. You don't need to win the old story. You only need to walk away head held high. And that is what makes your silence more powerful than any words ever spoken. Silence didn't make you weaker. On the contrary, it marked the moment you stood up not to fight someone, but to return to the power that was always yours. The heart they once dismissed as too much, too emotional, is now what haunts them the most. Because they've come to realize it wasn't you who made them lose control. It was your unconditional love that exposed the emptiness inside them. And now that you're no longer there to fill that void, they understand. You were never weak, you simply loved deeply. The strength you reclaim isn't about making anyone regret. It's about no longer needing to prove your worth to someone who couldn't see it. You've stopped using your pain as a reason to stay. You no longer confuse patience with self-abandonment. And in your quiet, grounded withdrawal, you recover the most important thing, your emotional self-mastery. Once, they controlled the rhythm of the connection. They pulled away, and you reached. They went silent, and you spoke up. But now, your silence is not a reaction, it's a choice. A conscious decision that shows you're no longer moved by inconsistency. You've stopped chasing the crumbs of a relationship that made you question your own value. And in that moment, the power dynamic shifts. Not because you control them, but because you no longer let them control you. This is not a loud victory, it's an inner one. You no longer need their understanding to feel complete. You no longer need their permission to walk away. Your silence is a soft but unbreakable boundary. It carries a message. I didn't choose myself because you were wrong. I chose myself because I was right. And that clarity makes you untouchable not because you've become cold, but because you've become clear. And then you realize, no one ever took your worth away, they only blurred it with their lack of emotional maturity. The silence you once feared becomes the greatest gift you could have given yourself. Not because it changed them, but because it allowed you to finally see yourself clearly, wholly, and without apology. You are no longer the one holding on, explaining, or proving. You're no longer dancing to the rhythm of someone else's emotions. You've become the one who steps back, stays silent, and chooses yourself not in bitterness, but in wisdom and self-love. They may never say it, but they know. They know you were the only one who truly saw them. They know you loved them beyond logic and wounds. And they know your silence isn't emptiness. It's the quiet conclusion to a chapter where you gave more than you received. They once believed they had the power, the control, but in the end, true power belongs to the one who chooses to stop bleeding for a connection that doesn't heal. You didn't win because they're hurting. You won because you stopped hurting yourself. You didn't grow stronger by becoming harder. You grew stronger by choosing peace over chaos. You're not above them, but you've become greater than the version of you who used to settle for less. Your silence doesn't end love. It ends the cycle of pain, and from there, a new journey begins. One where you love yourself with a maturity that doesn't beg, doesn't chase, and doesn't fear being alone. If you're sitting in that silence now, don't be afraid. You're not alone. You're simply coming home. And sometimes, the loudest act of self-love isn't saying more, it's walking away, quietly.